This is Christie Koehler, and she's from Portland, Oregon, and going to be talking about community event planning. So, let's give a warm welcome. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Welcome. Thanks for scooting up, like I said. So, a quick note on our objective. I created this 45-minute talk, or 30-minute talk, because we're going to allow time for questions, out of a 3.5-hour tutorial. And that 3.5-hour tutorial still wasn't enough time. So I'm not going to be able to tell you everything you need to know about community event planning in this time frame. So think of it more as a jump start to your event planning. Hopefully when you leave, you'll have an idea of what the big picture is of what's involved in putting on events like bar camps and PYCONs and open source bridge and things like that. So, some introductions first. I always like to do introductions. Who am I, and why do I think I should be telling you about running community events? My day job is with Mozilla. Right now I'm working on the Firefox OS developer phone program. That's right, we have a mobile operating system now, so you can ask me questions about that when you see me walking around. I also, in my spare time, am a director of the Stumptown Syndicate, which produces community technology events like Open Source Bridge, Bar Camp Portland. Those are the two I'm directly involved in organizing. We also do an Ignite. We Wear Camp Portland. We support some user groups, and I'm missing an event, but I'll think about it later. So who are you? Can I get a show of hands of anybody who's organizing any kind of user group, hackathon, conference, bar camp? Okay, that looks like about half. Okay, and I'm guessing the people that didn't raise their hand are interested in organizing some kind of event. Is that true? Okay, so are you interested in organizing really big conferences? Okay, some brave souls. What about bar camps, unconferences, open space type one-day things? Okay, cool. What about hackathons? Okay, good. And what about user groups or meetup groups? Okay, good. That's a great mix. I think I saw multiple hands go up multiple times sometimes too. Okay, so when you're planning an event, it can be really easy to get really granular and nitty-gritty and stressed out about things and forget why we have events. So I wanted to start off with this so that when you're planning, you can kind of keep that in mind. First, we have events to share knowledge. Getting together in one area, one space, talking is a really good way to share information. Also to get stuff done, close bugs, create or complete features, things like that, write documentation, don't forget the documentation, unit tests, things like that. Also to play, it's fun to get together and have social events and get to know each other better. And those three things are really about building community. Just keep that in mind when you're thinking about your events. Event types, I apologize for the tiny type. I actually have an online version of this I can send everyone. These are what we've learned during events in Portland. It's a grid that shows you about how long the planning takes, how much it costs, things like that. This has been true for us in Portland, but this can vary dramatically based on where you are and what's available to you. But it's just to give you an idea of sort of the relative scale of what you're getting yourself into. Okay, so overview of planning steps. And I'll keep returning to this slide as we go down. The first is to articulate your goals. Why do you want to articulate your goals? I didn't turn off my screensaver. Party foul. Okay. Having clear goals is one of the best ways that you can be able to check your progress. If you haven't outlined your goals at the beginning, how do you know, other than like a general sense of feeling good or a general sense of feeling bad, how well you've done? So when you're articulating your goals for your event, be sure to have an aspect that's measurable. So you can start off by saying, we want to increase the participation of women in our local user group. That's an awesome place to start. Make sure you have something like, we want to increase participation by 15% in the next 3 to 6 months, or something like that. Don't focus too much on the exact numbers, because if you miss them, that's not really the thing you want to focus on. You just want to have a sense of where you want to go, and then you can stop and see where you are and adjust. Starting an event is particularly difficult to set goals because you've never done it. How do you know how many people are going to come to an event you've never done before? You kind of have to take a wild guess, see how you've done, and then assess. So if you start your event and you expect 500 people and you get 100, maybe next year's goal is 150. If you expect 500 and 1,000 people show up, you might need to change some of your planning and expect 1,200 and order a different venue. Another really important aspect to event planning and meeting your goals is knowing your audience, both the audience that you currently have, if you're already doing events and community stuff, and the audience that you want to have. So actually sit down and think about things like what age is your audience, what gender, what is their socioeconomic status, what is their employment status, can people afford to come to your event if you set a really high attendance fee? Are they parents? Are they going to need childcare? Are you excluding parents because you don't have childcare? Also think about existing skill set. What are people coming to the table already knowing? One of the things that surprised me in running a Ruby workshop was that I don't remember when I learned how to work on the command line. I really don't. But lots of people, they have Macs. You think, oh, it has a command line? No problem. Lots of people have never opened terminal. And so you have to consider that and adapt and adjust to it. And also, when you're thinking about your audience, I think it's a really good idea to provide community guidelines. How do you expect people to interact with each other, and what are acceptable behaviors, and also what do you want to promote? So I forget what PYCON, does PYCON call this a code of conduct? It's one word for it. There's also community guidelines, things like that. So think about how you want people to interact with each other. Next, you need to recruit your team. You probably don't want to plan the event all by yourself, I'm guessing. So how do you recruit your team of superhero event planners? The costumes are optional, but they can be helpful. So it starts with you. And it helps initially to get an enthusiastic collaborator. So this can be a coworker, it can be someone you know through your local community. You can just start asking around and see who's interested. Next, you find a couple more people. I've found that 5 to 8 really dedicated planners can actually plan quite large events, larger than you might think, particularly if you have a lot of volunteers during your actual event. Some roles to consider when you're organizing your planning team. You'll need someone to assume some kind of leadership role. And this doesn't have to be a benevolent dictator. It can be someone more like a project manager who's just keeping track of the schedule, making sure you meet, keeping notes, things like that. Or someone who actually makes more of the decisions. You'll figure out what works best for you. You'll need someone to pay attention to all the logistics of your event. So working with your venue, working with the AV staff, Wi-Fi, catering, all those sorts of things. You'll also need to have someone thinking about content. And of course, your content needs will vary based on the event. You'll need someone to do outreach, otherwise known as marketing or engagement, things like that. People need to know about your event. You will often have registration. Somehow people have to tell you that they're coming to your event. Fundraising and sponsorship. And also, if you're having any additional activities at your event, party, hackerspace, things like that. And you'll notice that these roughly correspond to sort of the steps of planning. Some tips about good teamwork that I've learned over the last 5-6 years of working on these events. Don't over-specialize. When you over-specialize, it's really easy to have single points of failure. It's easy for people to get stuck working on things they don't want to work on. And it's okay for people to do multiple different things. So something that sounds a little bit contradictory to that, but isn't, is also be clear about who has a particular action item. One thing I've noticed, I'll be like, why is this thing isn't getting done? And then I realize, well, it's because there isn't a clear person assigned to it. So when we take our meeting notes, we always have a section for action items. We write the action items down, and at the end of the meeting, we make sure every single one of them has a name to it. And that's not to, we don't get angry at the person if it's not done the next meeting, but it's a clear indication that, oh yeah, that's my task, and you know who to check in with about it. Also, document, document, document. It's really important. And just like with writing code and other things, it's often something that we forget to do or don't get around to doing because you're so focused on getting the thing done for the event. But having good documentation is going to help make it easier for you to onboard volunteers, for you to remember how you did it last year. Like, how do we do that? If you've got it written down, you know. It also allows you to document the things that didn't go quite so well so that you can do them better next year. We actually have an Etherpad going for our events while they're happening, and as soon as something goes wrong, we're like, oh, let's write it down so that we know we need to do something different next year. And we also highly recommend following an open planning process. This is probably not unfamiliar to people who are used to working in open source, but have a mailing list. You can choose whether or not to have it be totally public or private. We often have our planning lists require invitation simply for the fact that we talk about sponsor stuff. And we've had sponsors say, hey, I don't like that you're talking about me. I don't like that when I Google my name, this mailing list thread comes up. So we're sensitive to that. And also, if you're having a type of event where you're selecting content and you need to talk about a particular speaker or a talk and whether or not it's good for the conference, that's just, that maybe isn't the best place to have totally out in the open. But have your notes up on a wiki, use Etherpads, all these sort of things. These should all sound familiar, I think, to most of you. So usually events start with the when and the where, because it's hard to plan for everything else until you know that. As I said earlier, the type of event will dictate your type of venue, mostly because the size and your space needs. Different cities have different venues available to them. In Portland, it's a little tricky because for beyond about 500 people, the only option is a convention center. And convention centers are expensive. They have vendor lock-in. The one in Portland isn't in the most exciting part of town. You have to take a tram across the river. It's not where all the cool stuff is downtown. Some cities have awesome convention centers. So depending upon where you live, get creative, look at pubs and bars, community centers. We moved Open Source Bridge to the First Unitarian Church downtown. They built a classroom learning center, and we use that for all of our sessions. And we have our keynotes in the sanctuary. It's awesome because we have a giant room-sized pipe organ that we start the conference with. And the Unitarians are just totally chill. We're like, we want to do this crazy thing, and whatever, we'll make it work. It's awesome. So don't rule out a type of venue because lots of people who have buildings don't use them all the time, and they want to rent them out. I just was hearing some crazy stuff about like South by Southwest, and space there is at such a premium now that Spotify like bought an old house and painted it, and they did their event there, and you know that was economical for South by Southwest, and there was no other space. So I'm not suggesting go buy a house for your event, but just think creatively about where you can have it. You don't have to have it at the convention center, unless you really want to. Be sure to ask about vendor lock-in. That can really screw you on budget. I think coffee here is probably something like $8 a cup or something, and that sucks for grassroots events. Another reason we like the Unitarians is that they charge us $1 for coffee, per head. So as much coffee as you want is $1 to us, and that's how we're able to keep our ticket prices low. And remember that vendor lock-in doesn't always just apply to food. It can apply to Wi-Fi and AV and things like that. Also think about accessibility. Can people with wheelchairs and canes and walkers access the venue? Is it accessible for the things you want to do? Are people going to feel safe coming to your venue? Is it open on the weekends, or do you have to go through some labyrinthian process to get into the building? Do you have to pay a security guard $500 to stand there and watch the door and let people in? All these little things you don't think about can really add up at the end. Also get insurance. I know lots of community events sort of don't think about this, but for one thing, many events require you to have a general liability policy and name them as an additional insured. Some events or some venues can provide this as an add-on, but it's just a good idea. If you have something not good happen at your event and you get sued or someone gets hurt, you may never be able to have that event again. And in some cases, depending upon what happens and what state you live in and country, that might actually come through to you personally. So I'm a big fan of insurance in this case. And it's actually, you can get one-off insurance that's affordable. So, gotta create a budget and a timeline. Even the smallest, tiniest events usually need some kind of money. You might want to order some pizzas or something. So it's a good idea to articulate what you think you're going to need to spend money on. And also track what you actually spend. Because a budget isn't so super useful if at the end of the event you don't actually know, was that budget even close? So you don't have to worry about fancy financial software or anything. You can use a Google spreadsheet or Numeric or LibreOffice or whatever. And a timeline is like a budget, except for dollars, it's for days or months. So when you are about to start planning your event, make a list of the really key milestones. When do we announce it? When do we tell people about it? When do we open registration? When do we open our call for proposals? Or when do we announce the schedule? Write those down and assign dates to them. Remember that deadlines are tools. If you don't have them, it's much harder to get stuff done. But also, if you miss them, don't stress about them too much. Every timeline I have ever made for an event, it gets totally blown out of the water. And yet, we still have the event, and it still works. But we found that if we don't assign dates to things, stuff doesn't get done. So a little bit more on raising funds. There are 4 primary ways to raise funds. You can get contributions from individuals, contributions from companies or organizations. You can sell tickets and other merchandise, or get grants. By far, the first 3 are the easiest. Usually, grants have all kinds of requirements around them. You probably have to be a 501c3, which is, or in the United States, that's a special nonprofit status. It's often restricted funds, meaning if you get a bulk of money and you use it for your event, you may not be able to use it for anything else. Also, before you start collecting money, think about how you're going to do it. And I don't just mean, am I going to use PayPal or Google Checkout or some other, am I going to use my merchant account? Think about, is that going into my personal bank account, or do we have an organization whose bank account that can go into? It's important because if you're collecting all this money for an event, that kind of looks like you're earning income, and you may have to pay taxes on that, which may be how you want to run your event, but just think about these things ahead of time because you can't go back and undo them. If you don't want things to run through your personal finances, and you haven't created an organization, which is kind of a pain in the butt in some cases, look for a fiscal sponsor. So the Python Software Foundation is the fiscal sponsor for, I think most all of the Python, well, probably not all Python events, but many of them. I think the Free Software Foundation does fiscal sponsorship, at least for open source projects. There's many, many organizations out there that do this. In Portland, we have, how many people have heard of the World Naked Bike Ride in Portland? Okay. It's something like tens of thousands of people ride their bikes naked through Portland in June. I'm not making this up. And I think it happens during Open Source Bridge, so if you want to come check both of those out. But they use a fiscal sponsor in Portland, and they don't really advertise themselves. People just kind of know about it. So look around in your community. You might be able to find someone to work with. Usually there is some kind of administration fee for doing that. Fundraising tips. Start with your local community, your user groups, companies that work in your functional area, whatever you're doing your topic about. Be clear about what people get for their money. So do they get a logo on your website? Do they get to be at the conference? Things like that. Make it really easy for people to give money to you. They shouldn't have to hunt around on your website, have a link to wherever they can give you money. Stay away from the word donation. If you are in the United States, if you are not a registered 501c3, Google and PayPal will automatically close your account if you have the word donation running through your account. And it's a pain in the butt, don't do it. Prioritize your community first. So if if someone wants to give you money and they want to do something that's going to hurt your event or detract from it or harm your community, just say no. It's okay to walk away from money. Occasionally this happens with our events. First time is always the hardest. What event are you doing? I've never heard of that. But then it gets easier. And if you don't ask, people can't say yes. For me, learning how to fundraise is really learning about how to get over being afraid of asking people for money. I realize not everyone has this problem, but I think some people might share it. So, spreading the word. Marketing's not a dirty word. People got to know about your event somehow. Grassroots marketing doesn't have to be expensive, but it does require a little bit of effort and planning and coordination. So here are the 4 easy steps to doing it. Write an invitation, include the important information. That's the what, where, when, why that you all learned in grammar school. Cross-post it everywhere. Put it on whatever your local networks are. In Portland, we have Caligator. We have, every user group has a mailing list. Put it on Meetup. Get the whole team involved, so your entire planning team should broadcast that through their networks. And then look for willing partners. So user group leaders, have them spread the word. If you have local tech journalism or blogs, get them to write about or put a banner ad. Oftentimes, local media will be more than happy to put a little ad up and have you say that they're a media sponsor. And then keep doing 1 through 4 over and over again. Every time you have a new thing to announce about your event, you can do this again. Commit your attendees. Commit your attendees to coming to your event, so have them register or RSVP. I recommend strongly doing this for free events as well as paid ones. The more you know about who's coming to your event, the better you can plan your resources accordingly, and it also gives you an opportunity to communicate with those attendees. So ahead of, a couple days before our events, we send people an email and we remind them, hey, you wanted to come to this event. Here it is, here's how you get here, and here's how the day is gonna go. We're gonna provide food or we're not gonna provide food. We're not providing food, but you can get it here. A couple registration options. I'm gonna skip over this, but there's lots of free options you can do out there, and you don't have to overthink it. You can use a Google form if you want. It's just a way to capture the information. Okay, logistics and content. I kind of already mentioned what's involved in logistics. It's up here again: venue, power, audiovisual, catering, food. The type of event that you choose determines how much energy you have to put in developing content, right? Obviously, if you have a multi-day conference with multiple tracks and multiple speakers, you've got to get those speakers somehow. So you've got to run a call for proposals, or you have to specifically invite them. You can do a reverse invitation. I think J Query Conf, I'm not remembering the name of it, did that last year. For unconferences, think more about cultivating the audience, because the audience generates the content. So you'll want to invite a really diverse group of people to fill out your subject areas. Also, you'll need to concentrate on coaching them into understanding what unconference is and being courageous and submitting talks. For hackathons, think about facilitating your team, making sure that people have what they need to do to hack. So setting up, making sure they have their environments, putting the environments on USB keys so that not everyone's downloading things on the Wi-Fi at a time, making sure there are bite-sized bugs or clearly articulated things to work on. And workshops are kind of a whole other ball of wax. Curriculum development is time-consuming and there's a lot to it. Fortunately, more and more resources are popping up, like Rails. How many people have heard of Rails Bridge? Okay, wrong audience. I should ask about the Python stuff. But they're packaging up their content and making it available. So workshops are getting easier and easier. Activities, and these are things like parties, hackathons, open space events that are combined with your main event. Consider mixing in different kinds. Have high energy ones, low energy ones, loud ones, quiet ones. If you're having a party, I highly recommend not having all your parties at loud bars where there's a lot of booze. Not everyone's comfortable going there. Think about also having family-friendly events. Day of. There's a lot that goes into the day of your event. Here's a really quick overview. Ahead of time, make a shopping list for the things you think you'll need. So for an unconference, this is a lot of blue tape to make your schedule grid. It's a lot of Post-it notes that for a while 3M wasn't producing, and we couldn't find them in Portland, and it was very stressful. But they're back out, so you're okay. Sharpies. I highly recommend buying some painkillers to put in your event box, because inevitably a few of you will get a headache. Also make a list of all the errands that needs to be run and who's going to run those. Picking up the pastries, getting the keg of beer, whatever it is. Also create a schedule rundown. A couple of things that have bit us a few years in a row at Open Source Bridge is we're really organizing our planning ahead of time, and then we get there and we haven't made a schedule, so I'm like, where are all my organizers? And we haven't agreed that people should be there, so they don't know. So make a schedule of everything that's going to happen during the conference, and if someone from your core team or volunteers needs to be there, attach their name to it, and do that ahead of time. Make sure you have lots of signage telling people where they need to go and where things are. If you're having scheduled rooms, it's a really good idea to print the schedule and put it up outside the door. And you'll need to consider your swag. It's a really good idea to have greeters to say, hi, welcome to Open Source Bridge. Head this way to get your badge. Or, you're late, go to the keynote. And you have to think about how you want to do registration. Even for free events, it's a really good idea to have a table that's out front that is sort of, this is the entry point, and you can get a name badge or a lanyard or whatever. Okay, really important to gather feedback after your event and say thank you. Everybody likes to hear thank you. I would like to collect feedback actually during the event. I always try to have a little bit of time for a little bit of town hall, so we get everyone in a room together like this. And I'll usually say, what was your favorite thing about the event? What was your least favorite thing? How did you like the venue? Things like that. And you can actually go through pretty quickly. And what I've learned is that there are some people that will give you direct feedback, but they're never going to fill out a survey. And so it allows you to get, and they also forget things. So it allows you to collect feedback in the moment. And you can also have it's very easy to make people feel like they're being heard, because you're right here and you can look at them and tell them. It does take a little practice, because some people can just really obsess about this one thing, and you have to say, okay, it's another person's turn now. And then after the event, we usually try to send some kind of attendee survey that basically asks almost the same questions as we do in person. You'll have to experiment to find out what works best for you. And also try to have a retrospective or a postmortem or whatever terminology you're familiar with your planning team a couple weeks after your event. Give people a little time to catch up on their sleep, but just talk with everyone and find out what went well, what didn't go so well, what you can do better for next year. That gives you a really good opportunity to say thank you in person. Usually this is when I distribute handwritten, believe it or not, I can still actually write by hand thank you notes. And that's just a nice thing to do. Also, don't forget to thank your sponsors for giving you money, and try to make it as relevant and as personal as possible. So when we send thank yous to our sponsors, we tell them how the event went. We had this many people, and these sort of things happened, and you made this all possible. Then you take a break, and you do it again. Or you don't have to do it again, but you can if you want to. So not every event has to happen over and over again. Sometimes there's a need for a one-off event. Questions?
Okay. First of all, thank you so much. If you have questions for Christie, we have a microphone here if you'd like to ask anything. I actually had a really quick question. What is a reverse invitation? I've never heard of that.
So what is their conference called? JConf? JSConf, okay. Oh, my brain is working again. Their CFP was that other people nominated people to talk. And I think you might have been able to nominate yourself. Is this not, am I making this up? Do people remember this?
No, they still do that.
Okay, all right, thank you. Sometimes I make things up, and I just want to clarify.
Okay, thanks. Anything else? Otherwise, I guess we can take an early break, and if you have any questions for Christie, feel free to stop by afterwards.
Well, are there questions that people are brave to ask in front of the whole audience? And did I wear you out with making you move up? Okay. One more thing is that we actually have a handbook that I left in the speaker room. So I have a couple of copies with me. And if you're interested in the sort of content of the 3.5-hour workshop, I have a PDF that I can email you. So just come up and I can email that to you. And also if you have any questions about doing your own events. So how many of you are like ready to go and you're going to assemble your planning team next week? All right. What is some of that stuff happening?
DC.
DC? Okay, what is it going to be?
Class, children's class.
A workshop for children. Awesome. What are you going to teach them?
Python.
Python. Awesome. Dumb question. All right. Yeah.
Go to the mic, please, so that it gets in the video.
I guess this is like an idea as far as a resource. I've been a part of like a club at City College, the Linux club specifically, but there is a coding club. So I know like I figure it's the same in other schools, but like at City College in San Francisco, if you're a club and you want to throw an event, you have like all this good access to space, to classrooms, to auditorium, you know what I mean, to all the big spaces. So if there could be some kind of connection between these meetup groups, no matter what the subject, and some kind of college club or something, that would be a good resource for getting space.
Yes, making connections with your local college, university is a really good way to utilize all the space that they have. And sometimes willing professors and staff can help you with that too.
Yeah.
So, excellent point, thank you.
I just wanted to add on to that a little bit too. I know a lot of us might be somewhat older too, but I'm sure there are some college-age people in this audience as well. A lot of times there will be student organizations. For example, at Penn State, when we would hold conferences, we could apply for funding, and up to, I think, about half of our costs, actually maybe more, it was something crazy, like 80% of our costs, they would cover it for us as long as we let students from our own place come in, and we could charge for other people. So that's another thing in terms of not just space to get from your schools, but possibly funding as well.
Oh wow, I hadn't heard about that, that's awesome.
Hi, my name is Noé. I come from Mexico, and also we're organizing events about programming, but it's kind of difficult. Like for example, I don't know if there are like core developers of the Python contributing from Mexico. It's kind of difficult like to get like keynote speakers like come to Mexico, especially in this time that it's not really like showing off like our best part. So I would like to ask you for an advice, like for maybe ask people to come, or maybe, I don't know if you guys would like to spend. I know that open source contributors can work from anywhere else in the world. So maybe more than also asking your advice, what could I do? And I would like also like if you would like to come and maybe have some vacations. We've got like a brand new hackerspace that we opened with the government. So it's like 20,000 square feet, and we want to fill this place with a lot of tech talks and design, whatever.
Okay, so your question is how to attract speakers to come participate at a conference that's in a place that maybe isn't known to be very desirable. Is that right?
Yeah, kind of.
So I would say that personal outreach is probably really important there. Talk to specific people, address any concerns they might have about safety or transportation or getting there, and sort of start slowly. Like have a goal of one person or two people or something. And as you get people there, and they have a good experience, they will tell others, and hopefully it'll get easier. Having not been in that direct experience myself, that's sort of the best thing I can come up with. Has anyone been in that role and has a piece of advice? Okay.
I guess not super.
Can you walk up to the microphone? Cool. This is.
I guess not like super immediate, but I think one idea would be just to work with, kind of like a study group. So get people together, I mean, even though somebody's not like a super like master or like super proficient or, you know, whatever it is, we can still learn from each other, like in smaller groups. So emphasizing that, learning from each other, maybe even like as a group watching different like videos of like say this conference or, you know, different things like that.
All right, I think it's time to let you go to break. I will hang out here, so if you have more questions, come up and talk to me. Thank you very much.